Well, what do you got for the 80s, Graham?
So for 80s, the one that just stands out above all the others for me is 1988 NWA. Speaking of police brutality, as you were earlier, the F the police calls out local police for the racial profiling and brutality that was rampant at the time. The song was so controversial that the FBI wrote a formal letter of protest to the record company that produced the track, which is crazy. But I mean, yeah, I mean, that song was a game changer, I think, just in terms of the statement that it made and communicated and just opening I think the eyes of a lot of people. I mean, I think it pissed off a lot of people, but a lot of times in order to make a point about something that is wrong or an injustice, you have to push some buttons. And they definitely did that with the song. And I just can't think of anything else quite as impactful overall as far as a protest song in the 80s goes. So for me, that's the only one I really thought of for the 80s.
Well, I'm shocked, to be honest with you, because that was going to be one of my top from the 80s. If there was a tape that I wore out and I probably had to buy multiple times besides Run DMC, it was Straight Outta Compton. And so that entire album, there's a lot of tracks I think that really call out social activism. And really what it did was, here's a white dude from at the time, Alpharetta, Georgia, blaring this, tape out the window and screaming the lyrics, not having one semblance of a clue of what it's like actually living in Compton. And now as an adult, I've actually gone to Compton multiple times. Like I've actually driven around and, never lived there, but I've visited and gone through, bought gas there, stopped and bought some stuff at a store, just to see what the area is like. And it brought, that environment, the poverty and the gang warfare that was going on in, Los Angeles at that time to the suburbs. That's what that album did. And I didn't relate to it you know, from a living standpoint, like where I actually lived, but it brought the story, to me. And it was a great album. But there was another one from Public Enemy, Fight the Power, that was really impactful to me. And, there was a movie, Do
Do
the
the
Right
right.
Thing by Spike Lee, that is fantastic. If I know Coy, both of you guys are movie buffs, but I remember that was one of the movies that we studied in college. And when I was taking some film classes, we went through and studied that film extensively. And Fight the Power was, a really popular song, not just from that movie, but from Public Enemy. And Public Enemy had some great tracks on multiple albums in the 1980s that I think really brought that inner city neighborhood to the suburbs, kind of let us know what life was like in the inner cities because we didn't have a clue otherwise. And
And they
there's
drew
many
their.
others. I mean, the 80s had a ton of great songs, but yeah, sorry, Coy.
No, sorry, I thought you were taking a break there. No, they drew their inspiration from the Isley Brothers in 1975 with they wrote Fight the Power Parts 1 and 2, and
Mhm.
that was direct influence for them when they came out with their song. So I think they believe they not only thematically and lyrically, but I think they might have sampled it as well. So yeah, that has a history of being a politically charged theme.
Any songs that stood out for you, Coy, in the 80s?
Yeah, we touched on some of them already with apartheid because that was really the, early to mid 80s and, We Are the World and Do They Know It's Christmas. I believe this was also the time frame that not necessarily a specific song, but Willie Nelson's Farm Aid, to bring it
Hmm.
back to a Texas artist for a little bit. That was really big during this time as well. We saw a lot of these. I mean, I mentioned we just had Fire Aid last week, and I watched that benefit concert, but this was the benefit concert era. I think it felt like it really started in the 80s, but we've seen a few since like 9/11 concert for New York. So it still happens, and I still will stop down and watch those because it's just not only do I like the live performances and like the artists and those songs, but they typically bring a kind of a new found perspective or respect, or just they honor the situation with their music, and it feels like it takes on almost like things you haven't noticed before. But as far as the 80s, I did mention Chris Christopherson before, and he wrote a song called "They Killed Him," which was covered a few times, but it's about Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Jesus. And that was written in 1986. That's a really good song. I recommend checking that out. But that's just, he was not, like I said, shy about trying to bring awareness to things that needed awareness. I'll give you this one. 1981 Iron Maiden Run for the Hills. Did you know that was a political song?
Not,
That is about the like colonization of America, and America basically, you know, the imperial nature of taking land that doesn't belong to you. So I learned that, and I've always liked that song, but didn't realize it was political.
Very cool.
There's a lot of, I'll touch on this because Dolly Parton's 9 to 5, I don't think we also think of it as a political song, but to bring in like another side that we haven't talked about yet, which is the women empowerment movement that started in the 60s and 70s. But yeah, Dolly Parton's 9 to 5, the movie itself and that song are both definitely pro women. There is Aretha Franklin's Respect was in the 60s, and that was a song that was originally written as not just like for a woman, but also I'm a person of color. And she added the RESPECT part of it. The original version didn't have as much political charges. When Aretha got a hold of it, it launched her into a star, but it also, I think, empowered a lot of women and people of color. But also in the 70s was Helen Reddy's I Am Woman, which definitely have heard that quite a few times, but that was a huge song in the 70s for the women's movement that was going on, and that one can really all be traced all the way to like Katy Perry's Roar in 2013. It's still like something that I feel like inspires women to do the songs that they do today. So that a bit of that was going on still from the 70s and 80s. So Reaganism and Thatcherism had, I think, both the UK and America writing a lot of political songs, if not protest songs. And the Cold War was another big component of that as well. So you've got a couple of songs that are just about like the looming overhead threat of nuclear war. And one of those is Nina's 99 Luft Balloons, which was written in 1983, which was inspired by them playing a concert in Berlin, and they released balloons, and they got worried about what if these balloons go over the wall, and what is that going to, so it becomes this song about basically nuclear war starting over something as arbitrarily as a balloon. And then Prince's 1999 was written in the 80s as well. And it became, in 99, it kind of became a celebration song. Like it's just a big party. The world, we're hitting the year 2000. But in the 80s, when that was written, was under the constant worry of the Cold War and nuclear war. And it's basically a song about like, if, the sky turns purple and, the world ends, what are we going to do? And they just decided we're going to just throw the biggest party that we can. And then even in 99, when it had its resurgence, there were some worries about the 99 to 2000 switch. But he actually wrote that song, I believe, because he saw a documentary on Nostradamus predicting that like the apocalypse would start in 1999. So it is a end of the world song, but it's a party song also. But you got to also put it in the context of it was written during the Cold War, and that was actually not like sometimes we watch apocalyptic movies or things now, and it's like this is sci-fi.
right.
And back then it was like, no,
The world might blow up.
This actually can happen. Like how are we going to do it? We're going to throw a big party. That's how Prince and his people are going to handle the end of the world. But yeah, so those were kind of the ones that stood out for me from the 80s. Oh, well, and Sunday Bloody Sunday by U2, 1983. It's probably one of the biggest protest songs on my list. They made it less about the specific things that were going on in Ireland, although that is what it's about, but they tried to make it a little bit more broader to just be about, that something the whole world could latch onto. And that definitely did happen. And that performance at Red Rocks where he's waving the flag and the rain is coming down and the whole crowd is chanting no more with him, it really became this anti-war song, or this, song demanding peace in our time, which we're still asking for, right?
We're aspiring for
Yes,
peace.
we should be so lucky to see that. So that's definitely like that music video being on MTV, and that song is huge, and that was a staple of their live show for so long until 9/11. They took it out, and then when after 9/11 it came back, and they do it now in their live show again. But for the most of the 90s was not part of their live show. Kind of
We were
going back to
chatting
that
about another U2 song a couple days ago. What was the other one that?
Bullet the Blue Sky you
Yeah,
mentioned the other day. And which is great imagery when you think about that phrase. It's basically you think blue skies, you think everything's good. You got nice blue skies. It's wonderful. And then what does a bullet do? It just tears through that and destroys, you know? So it's this imagery that just slams against each other of, you know, beauty and what a bullet can do to beauty. And that was written after Bonos did a lot of humanitarian work in Central America, and he saw what the US military's involvement in El Salvador was doing to that country and what war does to any country really. And so that was he asked the Edge to write or to come up with a guitar part that sounded like bombs going off. And I think Edge did a great job doing that. And that whole song is just, yeah, one really like angry bomb going off for,
it's an ugly song. Like, and
yeah,
not like just when you hear it, it's harsh
time.
on the ears.
Yeah, yeah.
Even the drums are harsh. So yeah, we were kind of chatting off camera about that song being a war song, and didn't know the story behind that. So thanks for sharing that.
I'm U2 guy. That's what I'm here for.
You are.
And before we move on from YouTube, we should also mention Pride in the Name of Love.
Oh, of course, yeah.
It's a big one too. But
Yeah,
anyway, what's
another
next, John?
I was gonna say another band that we could do a whole episode on if we wanted to just
You
do
Oh
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
like Bob Dylan, U2, like most of their catalog, even their newer stuff. Like when we get into these more recent decades, their last couple albums are still full of that stuff. It's just always been a part of them. That's what they write about. And I think
Yeah.
it's because they grew up in a country that was torn up by stuff like that, that they can't help but notice when it's going on somewhere else. They're going to say something. They're not going to sit by and not, bring awareness to that. So anyway, good, John.
Yeah, well, no, the 90s, all the teen angst came out, and Seattle was well known for the music scene that came out of Seattle. So did the artists of the 90s kind of continue the trend from the other decades? I mean, did you find that there were similar type songs being written through the 90s?
Yeah, so I'll start with Rage Against the Machine, 1992, Killing in the Name. The Rough Guide to Rock, 2003, I guess it's a publication. They called it a howling, expletive-driven tirade against the ills of American society. The song accuses the U.S. police force of being a white supremacist organization that kills in the name of white America. It was also the timing of it was, instrumental, as it was released only 6 months after the LA riots broke out. So that song, I think, had a huge cultural impact for sure. And it's, just a really badass song, to
It
be
is.
honest. I mean, that guitar part it hooks you in. So, but
Tom
yeah,
Morello is an amazing
yeah. What's
guitarist.
that? Oh, Tom Morello.
Tom
Yeah.
Morello, yeah.
Yeah, guitarist. One of my faves.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's for me, 92. Yeah, I mean, it seems more to me like there was a lot less sort of political upheaval. Well, I don't want to say political upheaval. There's plenty of upheaval, but I feel like the music did start to get less and progressively less political in the 90s. I might be missing out on some of that, to be honest with you, because I mean, in the 90s, I especially the early 90s, like I was listening to Milli Vanilli and Vanilla Ice and embarrassingly enough, New Kids on the Block, stuff like this. Well, I guess not early 90s. That's really more late 80s. But anyway, I can't point to a whole lot that really stood out to me in the 90s in terms of, stuff that stood out as protest songs. I mean, There's a moment, a musical moment that really stands out to me in my mind, and that's when Sinead O'Connor was performing on SNL, and during one of her songs, which references and it was written about the abuses of children by the Catholic Church, she held up at the end of the song a picture of the Pope and ripped it up. Famously, everyone probably knows that story, but I do remember that distinctively, as a big, huge moment, and everyone just kind of reacting to it. And looking back on it now, man, like she had some balls, man,
Hmm.
to do something like that in the face of the Catholic Church, which is a huge, powerful organization. Yeah,
Yeah, we
so
talked.
that was a stand that was taken that I really respected, and even
Yeah,
still to this day.
we talk about cancel culture like it's a new thing, but they came after her hard when she did
Yeah.
that, and like they were definitely cancel culture has been around for a long time. It is not new. But bringing it back to Chris Christopherson, and I think we talked about this in our Chris Christopherson episode. He stood up for her in a huge way and because he knows he's like I've been
Right.
political most of my career, and like it takes more guts to do that than to not do anything at all. And he's like, you need to give some respect whether you agree or disagree. It is a platform when you that's why it irks me a little bit when people are like, we don't listen to your music for you to get political, like we, blah blah blah. And it's just like, well, going back to Rage Against the Machine, I feel like there's people recently that are like this, they think they're just now being political. And like I feel like people got like, when they started to realize that Rage Against the Machine was political, that they started to like not like them. And I'm like, what did you think the machine that they were raging against was? Like, I think that's a meme. It's like, it wasn't a copier in the office, although we've all like gotten mad at office equipment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they've been political since day one. And Graham, you and I saw them live, not together, but we were both at that show in '98 at the Cotton Bowl, and they were opened for U2.
Hmm.
And I remember being like, okay, I get it because U2 brings awareness to a lot of things, that why they would be opening, because all of their songs were bringing awareness to something that I just had never seen before. And I didn't understand it at, being a 17-year-old kid that didn't grow up like they grew up. And, but I could appreciate it, and I was like glad that there was someone that had a voice like that was bringing awareness to something that, yeah, that most of America didn't know what it was like in LA or Compton, in those during that time especially, and even today. But one of my other '90s ones that I have is Tupac's Changes in 1998. He used the Bruce Hornsby, um the Way It Is piano riff, and the hook from that song, which is a great song also, but rapping about basically that experience. So I think that was a huge hit, and it was posthumous for him, if I remember correctly. Really big hit, and another song that just really brought awareness to most of America who had no idea what it was like, as we talked about with like the way that rap has used activism and protest in their music. How about you, John?
Yeah, well, I think I've mentioned this before that I was heavily into rap back into the 80s and into the early 90s. And, we've talked about there's different types of songs and what they're advocating for, but a band called Arrested Development
Yes.
had two big songs. I mean, they had more than two, but two of them in the early 90s. One was Tennessee, which was really just about their roots of where their families came from and just bringing awareness to coming from the South. And then they had another one called Mr. Wendell, which was more about homelessness. And, I think they've got a line in there where we just passed by some Mr. Wendell, who's a homeless person. So it brought awareness of, homeless situation, which I think in the 90s really started to become prevalent. I think before then there wasn't as big of a homeless challenge in the United States, but it definitely brought awareness to that. One that is one of those songs that I kind of learned through research is a protest song of sorts is Zombie by Cranberries.
Yeah.
That's another one, obviously going back to the whole Irish, IRA and UK fighting, there's a whole story behind that. And then one that's a personal fave of mine, which really talks about the Native Americans, is Dave Matthews Band's Don't Drink the Water. And if you ever have an opportunity to see that song live, it's fantastic. It's amazing. But it's one of my favorite Dave Matthews Band songs that's out there. But it talks about Native Americans and how, basically the white man stole their land and just kind of went through that. What's the term that we had for spreading our wings? The name escapes me right now, but there's
Just
a term associated with it.
American imperialism,
Well, no,
colonial.
there's no. It'll come to me later. I forgot it, but yeah, it was interesting to see that the artists of the '90s, you know, they did carry it on, and there's a lot of songs that we're not mentioning. I'm sure we all have like long lists here from each decade, but even the artists of the '90s carried that on, and there might have been different things that they were advocating for or bringing awareness to, but they still continue to do so. And then, heading into the 2000s, which, I haven't gone like decade by decade into the 2000s because we're about, 20 years into it now. But, what'd you find, I guess in the past 20 years, did you find any songs that really, were protest songs of sorts?
Yeah. So I alluded to it earlier that I think 9/11 and then the Bush era were a lot like what we had seen previously with like the Reagan and Nixon eras that just seemed to bring out a lot of that type of songwriting. So one that I will first bring up is Bright Eyes in 2005 wrote a song called When the President Talks to God. And Bright Eyes is Connor Oberst. He's the singer-songwriter. That's just kind of the name he goes by for his band performances that he does. But I mean, it's like they called him like this generation's Bob Dylan. And if you listen to it on, it's a lot of folky type stuff. But when he wrote this song, it kind of went next level for the Bob Dylan comparisons. But I mean, that is a it's a again, he doesn't hold anything back, and it's just really, whether you agree with the president or disagree with the president, or you're a fan of a president or you're not a fan of the president, you should listen to something like that so that you can either say like, see why you may feel the way he does, or be like, why don't I see this? Why does someone else feel this way about it? But it's basically, trying to justify taking away people's rights or occupying another country when we still, aren't really sure why we're in that country, or starting a war or any of that stuff. And I know like 9/11 was a tragedy, and our response to it was, you have 20 years of hindsight now to figure out what we did right and what we did wrong. But there were a lot of people in that moment not agreeing what was going on and writing some great music. And I'll piggyback on that, with punk, that's always been a thing with punk. And I think Green Day really stepped up during this era as well. And that whole album, American Idiot,
Yep.
is amazing piece of artwork. Whether you agree or disagree with the viewpoints brought, that inspired some really good music from that band as well. And that's probably probably my favorite era of Green Day. What about you, Graham? Anything from the 2000s that caught you?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you on the whole post 9/11 thing. There was a lot of just upheaval during that time and kind of backlash from that. I didn't, check out any particular songs or anything from that particular era, but I just kind of actually fast forwarded a little bit to 2020. And there was a song that the Chicks in 2020, after the killing of George Floyd, they wrote a song called March March. The song was a tribute to social justice movements. It pays a lot of homage to unpaid teachers, references gun violence and Black Lives Matters and more. And we already know, from their past, which you touched on earlier, that, they were never shy about speaking their mind and speaking out against things that they didn't agree with, and they got a lot of backlash for that. But that song at the time, like, it totally missed my radar. I didn't discover it until doing research for this that it existed, but it's worth checking out. If you haven't heard it either, it's a good song. And then another one that I was aware of in 2020 that came out, which was kind of unexpected again, because you talked about the country thing and how a lot of the mainstream country is very tends to kind of toe the party line, the the Republican or conservative red,
The red stripe,
however,
red stripe,
yeah, however the right,
red
yeah.
stripe,
What's that?
the red stripe, not the blue
Yeah,
moon.
yeah. So a lot of it tends towards that, that kind of viewpoint. But there's obviously, there's always, counterpoints to that. And Tyler Childers is kind of a more, he's a country, but kind of, I guess, more on the alt country side of things. But me, just very traditional, in his style of country. But he wrote a song called "A Long Violent History," which also was in protest of the George Floyd killings, George Floyd killing, and the Breonna Taylor murder as well. So, just gonna, reference some of the lyrics here. He says it's the worst that it's been since the last time it happened, expressing his belief that the United States, has this long violent history. That's the name of the song towards Black Americans. A lot of the fans of Tyler Childers actually got upset with, the fact that he would write a song, put a song out there like this, so much so that he had to issue a 6 minute long explanation about his views and beliefs and just talking about where he's coming from. So that was pretty huge from a guy like that. And just to kind of step out from knowing, I'm sure that, a lot of his fan base would probably, have some blowback on that just because of the political leanings of probably a big part of his fan base. And, kind of similar to like we were talking about with the Chicks before, when they did that originally, took the stand against George W. back in the day. But it's a really, really good song. Definitely check that one out as well. As recently as 2020, you talked about her before, kind of the women's rights movements in terms of activism, Coy. But Dolly Parton put out a really cool song in 2023 called World on Fire. And she talks about basically just calling out what's going on in the world today and how messed up everything is. I'll quote some of the lyrics again. Liar, liar, the world's on fire. What you gonna do when it all burns down? Fire, fire, burning higher. Still got time to turn it all around. Don't get me started on politics. Now, how are we to live in a world like this? Greedy politicians, present and past, they wouldn't know the truth if it bit them in the ass. So I thought that was a pretty cool song, pretty cool.
Go Dolly. Yeah, I think the early 2000s, there were, you called out American Idiot by Green Day. That's kind of a blatant in your face, protest song, which I haven't, historically been a huge Green Day fan, but like that song, when I heard it, it was catchy, really, caught my attention. There were a couple others from the early 2000s that I wanted to call out. So my favorite band, Pearl Jam, they did put out an anti-Bush song that was called Bush Leaguer with a dollar sign instead of an S in Bush. That, is a direct basic attack on George Bush and kind of his policies and what he's done. The White Stripes did one that's more environmental. The Big Three Killed My Baby, which is really about the city of Detroit and how the Big Three automakers just destroyed Detroit from an environmental perspective. And I love the early White Stripes and some of the material they put out. And then there's a real brutal one that, and I was thinking, guys, our playlist is going to be like insane for this episode, but Tom Waits did a song and it's off. He did kind of a three record set or a three album set of kind of B-sides and rarities. But there's a song called Road to Peace, and it is a brutal song. And it's specifically about a Jewish kid who's killed in Israel. And it's the fight between Israel and Hamas. And it's just a real rough song to listen to. But, I think Tom Waits is probably one of those Pete Seegers of our generation. He's a great storyteller and he's got a lot of great songs that actually are political in nature, but that was one he put out in the 2000s. And then, one that really, it wasn't so much the song as it was the video for this one, but when I first saw the video for This Is America from Childish Gambino, I don't know if
Mhm.
you've seen it.
Yeah.
Holy shit, did that, like, it is a visual masterpiece. Like the song and the visual component, seeing it together, it just is like wow. Like I think that was 2018 when it came out, but it had been quite a while since I'd seen somebody or something that moving to me and that
Hmm.
provocative and so much in your face. But amazing song, amazing video. If you haven't seen it, you need to Google it and YouTube it and look at it and watch it. And then my guys Pearl Jam, they put out a song on their last album, Gigaton, called 7 O'Clock, which is really it's a political protest song about our latest president's first term. So yeah, those are a couple that I wanted to call out. So from my research, I'm anxious to get your feedback, but I'm glad to see that there's still songs coming out that are kind of pushing the envelope and pushing us forward to change and improve. How about you guys?
Yeah, I'll add in there for more recent. Kendrick Lamar has some pretty political songs. Janelle Monáe is
Mhm.
another one that even David Byrne from Talking Heads incorporated one of her songs into his Broadway show that he did. It's really powerful. There's a filmed version of that that you can watch that is that part of it specifically where she's just, in her song she's naming different African Americans who have been killed, and he does it in his act too, and it's just really powerful. Beyonce's Freedom, bringing it back to Texas artist Beyonce. It's easy to forget that she's from Texas, but she is, and she came out with that in 2016, and it's another one that comes out of that movement of Black Lives Matter, whatever you want to call it. Just it's the what I would call the current civil rights, and just saying that there's injustices going on still to this day, but that actually was used. Kamala Harris used that for her campaign as well. So those are there's still definitely political songs being written these days. A few more honorable mentions from the Bush era, just because there was some great music written back then. But System of a Down's BYOB, which is Bring Your Own Bombs in 2005, which basically equates signing up to join the military during that era to like going to a dance club, like a disco, which explains like the really dancey chorus that song has. But it's really an indictment against military recruitment and US imperialism in that era. And then Beautiful Occupation by Travis is a song from 2003, which is against the occupation of Iraq. And Travis is a great band. I've always loved them. Graham and I saw them recently here in Dallas, and that's a really good song, but also came out of that era and what was going on. And then I'll say that Radiohead came out and said they appreciated that Travis wrote that song, which is saying a lot because they had a whole album, Hail to the Thief, that came out in 2003, which pretty much every song on there was political, but they did an interesting take on it whereas Travis was more overt with what they were trying to say, Tom York really he had just had a child, I believe, and he was having just trouble like really wrapping his head around all of it. So the point of that was for him to write about these things through the eyes of a child and almost make them like fairy tale
Hmm.
tellings of what was going on. So Hail to the Thief is a great album, but directly influenced by the political environment of that era. And then I'll bring up U2 again, just because in 2017, I believe it was, with Songs of Experience, there's several songs on that album. Like any U2 album, pick a U2 album and it's going to have political songs on it. But you can start with, I think it's Get Out of Your Own Way. The next song is American Soul. The next song is Summer of Love. And then the next song is Red Flag Day. And all of those songs are like a great four tracks going right into each other. They're just about the state of America and in that time frame. I think this will be like Trump's first run with the country, and then also international things like Syrian refugees and Bono and U2, they've always really identified with refugees, and that's also like a biblical thing. The Old Testament is a story about a people who are basically refugees and trying to find their own country and their own nation in the ancient Middle East, which is the cradle of civilization. So, there's the way that refugees and immigrants get treated. Sometimes I feel like the group of people that are treating them that way are missing maybe the point of the basis of their religion. And so U2 gets it though, and so they have a lot of songs about, even going back to their eight stuff in the 80s, they have songs about refugees and how we should be taking in people that are in need. Other bands from the 2000s that I think are pretty political, Muse. If you listen to a lot of Muse, it's about resisting and standing up for what you believe in, finding love in times like that. They drew a lot of inspiration, especially their song "The Resistance" from like 1984 by George Orwell, which was a very political piece of work, and sometimes feels a little like a documentary or a prophetic piece of work. Yeah, I think that hits most of the ones that I had for 2000s, but we did mention Simon and Garfunkel when we were talking about the 60s, but I had them written down. I probably should have mentioned them. But again, it's one of those episodes that there's so much we're gonna leave out more than we're gonna remember. But yeah, it's I think we said it earlier. It's been as long as there's been music, there's been political music, or at least music that's been used for protest or activism. And it's just because that's what music is supposed to do. It's supposed to resonate on a very deep level with the listener. And I think we've talked about a lot of really good examples of that. But yeah, we could have probably broken this out into several episodes and just focused on specific artists.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame we didn't even mention Simon and Garfunkel. We could do a whole episode on Simon and Garfunkel's political activism songs as well. But I think, it's good to see that there's younger artists, newer artists that are carrying on the torch. And, we want to hear from you guys. Like, what did we miss out, back from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even to today? Like, what are your favorite, political or activist type songs that are out there? But, I'm going to kick it to one of you guys to kind of take us out of here. And I think we probably should thank St. Arnold again before we head out. So who wants to take it?
I'll take it. Yeah, thanks you guys. Appreciate all your input and research and all that you had to share on the topic. It was a very interesting discussion. And yeah, like you said, cheers to St. Arnold again. And appreciate them making quality beer and being a good Texas independent brewery. But for now, yeah, we'll sign off and wish you well until our next episode. Until then, if you would please just, give us a follow or like or share or whatever it is you have to do on whatever platform it is to keep, in connection with us so that you know when new episodes are out and new content's out there from us. We would appreciate it. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.